Can you figure it out? Here.
Just gonna text Jessi.
Your name's gonna be Aggressive Fan?
No.
Okay.
No. Why would it be that?
Thanks, Jordy. Run Jacques Lemaire time, so we're already 2 minutes late. I'm sorry about that, Jacques. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. This is just an awesome platform. Thanks to Jordy and the gang for inviting us to hang out here tonight. Take a look around. A lot of good things coming with the Bleachr App. Want to introduce my guest, who we'll get to right now. I actually have to look at her rider real quick and see what I had to say. Oh, it says writer/badass. And I don't disagree. So we'd like to welcome Jessi Pierce in from NHL.com. Jessi, thanks for joining us. Quite the day for you so far. Unmute yourself, Jessi.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
There, I'm good now, right? You'd think This was my first time doing.
There you go. Yep, you're good.
All right. Hi, guys. Yeah, no, I'm glad we figured this out. Thank you so much for having me. No, have we missed news? Has there been wild news today? I must have missed some of that.
Let's get right to the I had a couple of like fluff questions here to start, but I think we better get right into the news of the day, Jessi. As Zach Parise, a healthy scratch tonight with the Wild for the first time in his Wild career. Throughout the season, I think his production definitely hasn't been where I know he wants it to be or the team wants it to be. There's been stretches where he's looked pretty good. He's down on the third line now, a little bit more difficult. But one play in particular, which we all saw in the last game, kind of led to today. Why don't you talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, for those that caught the game on Monday night, Minnesota obviously dropping the full 2 points, going into overtime with Vegas based on a late goal, a goal that Zach Parise was actually on the ice for. He overextended his shift, and Dean Evason decided that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and decided to place Zach Parise as a healthy scratch tonight. Only the second time in his entire NHL career, first time as a member of the Minnesota Wild. So I think it was definitely a shock to Zach, because it's something that doesn't happen to him. I mean, sure, a player has a bad game and the result is a healthy scratch, but this is Zach Parise. Everybody's talking about a superstar of sorts that is getting paid quite a bit of money from the Minnesota Wild regime. But I think it maybe needed to happen. Zach had said he wanted to stay out there because he was trying to get Marcus Foligno a hat trick. Foligno obviously had the 2 goals on Monday night, and he was hoping to help lift his teammate. However, the win usually should come first instead of a hat trick for a player. So Dean Evason made the call. I think it was the right call. I think Zach will come back from this stronger. I know he's been frustrated with the way he's played this year, as has everybody else that's been watching. So it's one game. He'll probably be back for the Arizona series coming up this weekend. But again, I think it'll be a little bit of wake-up call to number 11 and his teammates, who now realize that truly anybody could, be benched. If you're not performing right or you're not up to the task that night, then they'll find somebody else who will.
And this has been really, the changing of the guards since Dean Evason took over. You look at particularly the Wild's success in overtime, and part of it, there's been no Parise, there's been very little shooter. It's clear that since Evason took over from Bruce Boudreau, any kind of favoritism or what did you do in the past 10 years, now strictly, what have you done for me lately?
Sorry, could you repeat that question one more time?
What have you done for me lately with Dean, especially in overtime? In this situation, he plays the guy things give you the best chance to win, not whoever might be highest on the payroll.
Right. I mean, I think that's been huge for Dean. You saw overtime was the worst in the entire league forever. They had won 12 overtime wins since the 3-on-3 was initiated in 2016. And he started just saying, hey, I'm going to go with those young legs. I'm going to go with those fresh legs. That's what you need. A guy like, Zach Parise, who's a little bit older, certainly doesn't need to be out there for the 3-on-3. You got guys like Kirill Kaprizov who can skate, Kevin Fiala who can skate. I think it's been huge that Evson has finally kind of stood up maybe a little bit to some of those leaders to say, hey guys, we're going to take this in a different direction. It's your turn to kind of maybe sit and cheer on and let these younger guys shine.
And we'll get to some good fan questions here in a minute. You mentioned Kirill Kaprizov. You've seen him in person. Just tell us what it's like.
I will say I was in shock from day one at training camp. You obviously hear a lot about him. I'd seen the highlight reels just as much as everybody else, but I was apprehensive coming into it because, again, it's his first time on North American sheets of ice, and there was a whole lot going into it. He's still a young guy. I was worried that maybe the pressure would build up to him. Maybe he's not as impressive. That day one of training camp, I was like, he is even better than we have been talking about. It was so exciting to see. I think the best thing about him is not only his infectious smile, which is number one for me. I love how much fun it looks like he's having out there on the ice every single play, but his willingness to just try things. It has been so long since the Minnesota Wild have had a player that's willing to go in, be creative, dipsy doodle, give something a shot, and just give it an effort. And Kirill Kaprizov is that, and he's everything he was advertised and more. It's been absolutely so exciting to watch. I'm sure you guys could all attest to that. I know he's a big reason that many folks are back on this Minnesota Wild bandwagon now.
And obviously, he had the overtime goal earlier. He had some great passes. He went through a little bit of a stretch where it was like, all right, is this going to continue? But I think really part of the problem, he is such an elite playmaker. You need an elite scorer and somebody. He was passing the puck to guys, and there was no way you'd be expecting to pass. So I think finding a couple guys in Victor Rask and Matt Zuccarello who've been able to play with him, just to know that you got to have your stick in the ground at all times because you don't know when the puck's going to come, but it's always going to come.
Exactly. Well, and I think that was the struggle early on for the season is who can you pair with this guy that can keep up with him and his creativity and constantly be ready. I think that was a big challenge. And I'm sure nobody saw that Matt Zuccarello and Victor Rask were going to be the two guys that end up finding that winning combination, but it certainly has worked out tremendously. I know we actually spoke with Kirill Kaprizov yesterday via translator, and he had said him and Matt Zuccarello, he feels, are very similar players, and that's why it's worked so well, is that him and Matt's have a kind of a connection as far as Matt's knows where the puck's going to be and kind of plays with that play. So that's been a huge gimme for them. It's great to see. Again, I know everyone wants to see a Kevin Fiala and Kaprizov line, maybe a Marco Rossi in there next season, who knows, which could also be equally as exciting. But right now it's just great that they found some guys that chemistry is really working like that line is.
The chemistry is so important. People wanted to put Fiala with Kaprizov early on, and they were a little bit in the third period when they were down, but they just didn't look like they belonged together at that point. And that still may come. It may come later this year. It might come next year. They're going to see more third period shifts together probably in tight games, but it just it's a very European style with those three guys. And the most impressive thing maybe is they're not poor defensively either. The best way to keep the other team from scoring is having the puck, obviously, and they do that. But they're pretty self-responsible in the other end.
And I mean, he can hit too. Like Kaprizov really kind of does it all. It's amazing to see. Like he's a smaller guy, but he's not afraid to go out there and throw his body around, and the constant effort that he continues to bring. He's often the last guy off the ice at morning skate or practice, usually the first guy on too. So I mean, there's really not enough that you could say. And like you had mentioned, the defense and the back checking, this team in general seems to just have a better sense of getting the rushes too, which I think is tremendous. That's something the Minnesota Wild haven't been able to produce as much in the past. And now they're finally being able to get going on some of those rushes to get that offensive surge. Really, I'm usually very cynical of the Wild, as many of my Twitter followers may know, but that cynicism is wiping away a little bit. This Minnesota Wild team has certainly found a new fan.
I will say in the takeout, are you subscribed to the takeout? Because it should be. In the takeout the other night, I wrote, all right, I finally believe. And then the last 10 minutes happened. I had to rewrite the whole thing. So I'm like that close.
I know.
Getting some questions. I think user error. I might have deleted one or two by accident. I remember what one of them was about. Tim, I saw yours, but let's go to B-Dog. And you talked a little bit about that transition play. I think especially the guy that's excelled there. Talk a little bit about kind of the surprise that Joel Eriksson Ek has been this year and what makes him successful in your eyes?
I mean, yeah, it's nice to kind of say finally, right? Minnesota Wild have been hanging their hat on Joel Eriksson Ek for quite some time, hoping that he would become this player that they really wanted, especially with Mikko Koivu at the time on his way out, now officially out. But it's tremendous. He played the pest role a lot in the past seasons, but now he's kind of come into his own as this true center, which the Minnesota Wild, as we all know, is in desperate need of a number one center. I'm not saying Ek will necessarily be that role, but he certainly has gotten there, having one of his best years in the NHL to date. So as long as he can keep that going, it's looking very promising. He just looks like a more confident, stronger person up the middle that's really helped this team succeed.
This team from day one, I mean, Gabrick was a superstar. Obviously, they've got a star too now, but it's been built around having key cogs in places where they can be successful. And I think he's a perfect example of that. You know, he can play up and down the lineup. He obviously is probably one of the, if not the hardest worker on the team. And you talk about the number one center situation, and obviously it's been a big talking point all along. And number one centers don't grow on trees. There's a reason that they never become available. You've either got to grow them at home, or you got to give up an insane amount of prospects, picks for that guy. So they're in a bit of a pickle because it's not, the cupboard isn't bare, but they don't have so many top prospects that you'd have to give away Rossi to get a number one center. So why don't you just maybe wait a year or two until Rossi can play?
Well, exactly. And you're hoping that Rossi becomes, again, the player that you foresee him being. And I have faith that he will. For the first time in a while, I'm also very excited about the futures and about the prospects of these players, because I've seen nothing but really great things from them. And I'm hoping that can translate. But you said it right there, Ryan. Number one centers, Minnesota is not the only team that needs a number one center either. There are plenty of other teams with more money to spend and players that are a little bit more appealing. I know Jack Eichel, obviously, the big discussion. And Minnesota Wild, sorry guys, I don't know that they would be in that conversation, because you'd have to give up pretty much everything and everything that you really want to hold near and dear to your heart in order to get a player like that. So I think put some stock into Eichel, put some stock into Rossi. Maybe Victor Rask is the real deal, who knows, or maybe Nick Bukestad finally comes to fruition too. But yeah, I think if you can just build Rossi or Ek into a number two center, that would be really appealing too. Yeah. I mean, Minnesota loves Minnesota, right? We'll talk about ourselves all day long, state of hockey. We're the only ones that know hockey. And it's great. I mean, you've had so many players come through, whether they're still with the team or not. You've got the Minnesota guys. I love the Minnesota connection just based on my own writing with Minnesota hockey. Easier story for me to write. I'm all for that. But yeah, I think Bill Guerin's certainly not tied to that by any means. Not to say that Chuck Fletcher necessarily was, but it seemed like maybe he had a little more sentiment for that. I think Guerin, having been a Boston guy and playing for the Bruins, knows how difficult that could be. He actually mentioned that when he brought Nick Bukestad home, how he had a conversation with Nick saying, hey, you're home, but you're working. We're not here to like make amends with family and friends. And hey, we're here. It's a job for you. So I don't think they'll ever totally go away from it. I think Craig Leopold also likes that Minnesota homegrown vibe a lot as well. But Minnesota certainly produces some of the best players in the NHL. So if they're talented, they'll come here wherever they're from, I think.
We had a question about Bukestad, Jessi. I want to talk to you a little bit. He's in the final year of a pretty big contract that he originally signed. Your thoughts on him potentially being next year? I think he's had so many injuries. Obviously, he's going to take a significantly reduced rate. He's been okay at times this year. He's struggled at times. It takes, coming off those injuries he came back from, it's going to take a long time. And it, quite frankly, takes probably playing more minutes a night than he's currently doing to kind of get himself back to where he was before.
Right. It's the same surgery that Zach Parise had, and we've all kind of seen how that's panned out a little bit. No, I mean, Nick is a great person. He's a solid player, but he's also getting up there in age. And I think they gave him an effort and a look at that number one spot and to try to play him up there. And they've ultimately found him a better role down on that fourth line. And I think that's okay. Like you had mentioned, Ryan, he'd be cheap and he wants to be here. And I think he would be willing to take whatever that might be in order to stay here. I'm bummed to see that he hasn't really resurged his career like he had hoped, but there's still quite a bit of time to get him in the mix. He certainly does well at home. The Minnesota Wild will have a huge home stretch coming up here in March, so maybe he finds his groove back again at the XL where he has scored all of his Minnesota Wild goals. But yeah, I mean, I think if he comes cheap enough, I have no problem keeping him around by any means, but that just depends on what he might demand come the end of this year.
Question from Wade. Wade, thanks for joining us. Victor asks, seems to be having a comeback season. Do you credit this to keeping him away from the sweet potatoes? I do. His turnaround is honestly probably the most surprising thing about this team this year. Do you agree?
I would absolutely agree. And for those that are unfamiliar with the sweet potatoes, he was injured very severely chopping up sweet potatoes when he was with Carolina. That kept him out of the lineup. No, I mean, it's funny. We had actually talked about this on my Bar Down Beauties up for debate question today, was who has exceeded these expectations. And no disrespect to Victor Rask, but I didn't have any expectations of him really. So, I mean, it was very easy for him to jump on over that bar. He's found a really successful place in the faceoff circle, which is tremendous to see. That's definitely helped. Is it sustainable is the biggest question. Is this just kind of a fleeting moment, a flash in the pot, or is it something that he can continue on throughout the rest of the season? And only time will tell. I mean, it's looked okay so far. But yeah, it's great. He's been up for the task, Victor Rask. I certainly am all about that same.
He is not gifted with the fleetest feet in the world, but when you're playing with those other two guys, if you can stay in the offensive zone, if you don't skate backwards, what does it matter? You got to go for a line change, So I think I know he had a conversation with the coaching staff and the management staff after last season about, hey, you're going to have an opportunity. I mean, just read the tea leaves. Look at that center lineup coming into this year. Like, you're going to have a chance to do something. So go home and work out and, come in the best shape of your life. And I think, the first couple of games, we all kind of joked and laughed like, oh, Rask number one center. But I mean, outside of Eriksson Ek, you can't argue with the way he's played at all.
Exactly. And I almost feel bad because even coming into the season, the constant questions we would have to Victor were, hey, so do you think you can do it? Almost, can you do this? Are you an NHL player? And he always met them with a large amount of confidence, right? And that you wanted to buy, like, yeah, I'm still an NHL player. I still can do this. I'm still very capable. So it's nice for him to have these moments and prove to himself again, which is where maybe that's the confidence he needed. Maybe he just needed to get on this path to get rolling. So I'm curious to see where it leads.
Anybody in our, I got a couple more questions up here. Anybody in our live studio audience want to actually ask a question with their voice? Anybody up there?
I mean, I think so a little bit, or it tends to be that those games are some of the most exciting games that the Wild play at home. And I don't know if it's maybe generally the energy of the crowd in a normal non-COVID season, or if it's just kind of the magic of Hockey Day Minnesota, as I call it. I mean, I don't think that they're fully all bought in like the high school players are, like the college kids, right? Especially when you have guys that aren't from Minnesota and don't really understand the passion and maybe the affinity that folks have for a day like that. But the Minnesota guys obviously certainly get it. Nick Bukestad played in all these hockey days now. Zach Parise obviously been a part of many of them with the Minnesota Wild. So I think certainly they want to do that. And again, at the end of the day, you want to give your fans something to cheer for. So if you can give them a dramatic overtime win with 0.3 seconds after you have an inaugural camp like Matt Dumba did on Saturday, it's more power to them. And it makes my job on writing the story much easier as well.
The other thing, and this year, obviously COVID aside, but those games are typically at a little bit later because of the TV schedule, so they're at 8. And having been to, 600-700 home games, those later games, people have a little longer time to be at Tom Reed's, time to get the cannoli and some sugar at Cassetta's and head to the game. And the energy level at the 8 and 8:30 starts, I think, unparalleled from the start, tend to be a little higher. And also, just the FSN's usually on. The guys get to the rink, they see that it is a little bit of nostalgia for them as well, as Jessi said. And I think, there's so much talk from the team about it. They're doing interviews with FSN. There's so much talk about it that you can't help but probably pay a little more attention than you may normally pay attention to it.
Hey, I've got a quick question. This is Tim.
Go ahead,
Can you
Tim.
hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, say, I know obviously Kirill's getting a lot of talk about winning the Calder Trophy, but then I was just before coming on, I saw some article about Tim S. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Ottawa. Just the fact that he's Tim S. makes him a good guy in my opinion. But anyway, I'm just curious on your thoughts on Tim versus Kirill.
Sure, Tim Stutzel, I believe, is his name, and he's a fantastic player. He's actually named NHL's Rookie of the Month, which I know many Kaprizov fans were disappointed here because Kirill obviously had a phenomenal month of February as well. I would say he's probably the biggest challenge or competitor for with Kirill for that spot for that Calder Rookie of the Year at the end of the season here. But I think Kaprizov will edge him out slowly but surely. Stutzel's again off to a great season with his squad, but I think Kirill has it in him. I think Minnesota Wild are rolling a little bit better. So I think he'll come away with it, fingers crossed, because how exciting would that be, Minnesota Wild fans? But yeah, I think Tim S is still a fun, great player to watch for sure too.
And I think the other thing about that too, with this schedule this year, Tim's playing against every Canadian team, and that's where all the big, media is primarily. Even if the Wild's playing a lot in California, not as many people are seeing Kaprizov right now play. Now that's gonna, obviously the voting happens before the playoffs and stuff. But I think as the Wild gets home more, as we have less of these 9:30 starts that keep us up past midnight, and the Wild keeps winning more games, and Kaprizov keeps, goals, assists, all that stuff. I have no doubt that he. And the other thing to think about, if Kakinen keeps playing the way he does, he might take some votes away from his own guy. So that might be another challenge too. But I know the Wild will be pushing for it. Certainly even probably the writers in our division will be pushing their Canadian counterparts. Have you seen this kid? Seriously, have you seen?
Right. You just need Ottawa to really tank, and then Tim is kind of out of the discussion a little bit too. So that'll certainly play a factor.
Thanks for asking that question, Tim. Maddie wanted to ask, but she was too shy. As you can see, she's hiding her face too. But anyway, Tim, I think you're my neighbor, by the way. I think you live right by me in South St. Paul.
South St. Paul connection. That's right.
Yeah, I think you live like right down the road from me. So hi.
Question for Ryan. Jessi, I'll let you start with this one. Well, it's 2A, so you can't say Monica.
Come on, I'm a Class A girl. Let's go.
Your pick to win the 2A tournament.
Oh, you guys, I have to apologize. I have not paid an iota of attention to high school hockey yet this year. I'm really, really sorry. I mean, Hill Murray, they look good every year, right? They've got to be up in the discussion as well. Ryan, who's looking good? I mean,
it's kind of a down year for Edina, which is an interesting. I mean, they've bounced back a little bit, but the interesting thing to me is that Edina's a little bit. It's kind of opening up for everybody. Eden Prairie's good, but they're not crazy good.
Yeah.
St. Margaret's competed right now in conference. So we've talked about in all these sports that, in a season like this, literally, I mean, look at what's happening to Edina. Anything can happen in 2021. So I personally, it's unfortunate there won't be fans there, but I'm really, really excited to see these state tournaments because anything's going to happen on any given night. I mean, even I think sectional playoffs are going to be crazy. I do a lot of work for the Pioneer Press on preps, and I'll be typing in scores one night or a schedule. I'll be like, this team beat that team, really? And it's truly been a crazy season already in preps.
I love it. That's what makes the high school hockey so great here. You want my vote for Class A would be the Matamidi Zephyrs, and they'll repeat back to back. For those of you who don't know where my alumni status lies, that's what I'll give you that. See the thumbs up. I like that. I apologize for those that hated the Hill Murray comments because I saw a lot of thumb downs for that, but sorry.
Maddie did ask a question on here. I want to know, when Boldy comes in, who do you think his line mates will be? He'll be good with Matt Boldy, but is that
those lines questions?
I know, you guys know how I feel about hashtag line heathens. No, I mean, I think anybody really. I think toss him out there, see what he can do. I'm so excited for Matt Boldy. I'm not looking to rush him out of Boston College because I do think there's such value in finishing out a college career and going well, and those BC Eagles are looking really solid this year as well. But no, I don't, that's a really great question. I haven't even thought of who. he could be with, especially because we don't know how this team is going to look next year. I think there's still a lot of time for quite a few moving parts this season, whether that come via trade. Obviously, we've got the expansion draft to consider as well, and where the Wild finish up the year too. So I think Boldy will succeed with any of the guys that he's put with too. I think he's shown that. I mean, he's been fortunate enough to be with the Team USA at World Juniors. That's a lot of those same players. BC has a lot of the same guys. So he's had a lot of familiar faces around him for a long time, but I think he's a guy that kind of carries this very humble swagger, if you will, if that's even a thing, because those contradict each other. But he does. He'll come in confident, and I think he'll play really well. Maybe with Jordan Greenway, right? Because him and Greenway, both BC guys, both USA guys, we'll see. But I'm excited wherever he plays to see how he translates into the NHL.
Do you think he will turn pro after the season?
I don't know. It's really, really tough, because part of me thinks that he's a guy, to quote the best hockey movie ever, Miracle, well, I want to win a national championship. I think if they win a national championship this year, it's easier for him to say goodbye, like most college players. And I think it also depends on how many of those guys stick together. They have a very, very strong team in BC. So I don't think it's a decision he would take lightly. I don't think he's going to be in a huge hurry either. Also depends on the conversations that he continues to have with Bill Guerin and the team. I think he's a guy that doesn't want to necessarily come in and wait his turn. I think he wants to be a guy that could slot right in. So I think, again, that would look at if he fits into the lineup right away next year or not.
And I think, a lot of Wild fans, and I probably egg them on occasionally, the whole Cole Caulfield from Wisconsin obviously picked, the Wild didn't need him, so to speak, and we all see Caulfield play because he plays the Gophers and we see him on Big Ten Network. But let me tell you, Matt Boldy, he might not make it forget about Cole Caulfield, but he's no slouch, and he's going to be a good player for this organization for a long, long time.
Absolutely. I mean, he makes himself a part of a team with the U.S. national development team that had superstars like Jack Hughes, like Cole Caulfield, and he was still this amazing part. And I know everybody finally bought into that at this year's World Juniors gold medal win, but he's always kind of been a really solid player. So they got a good one in Matt Boldy.
We had a question about the West Division and whether you think that's been advantageous for the Wild. I certainly, going into the season, you kind of looked at it, and obviously it's not ideal from a game watching standpoint. Like, we get it, I get it. But you look at the teams you're going to play, and it's hard to say now. We're third of the season in. The Wild kind of knew what they were doing, I think. Basically saying it doesn't really matter to us, as St. Louis, was complaining, no, we need to be in the Central Division. You kind of got to play 700 hockey against the bottom teams and not even break even against the top couple. And we'll see what happens in the next couple of months. But I think it's definitely so far been a little bit easier than maybe another path.
The old good Honda West. Yes, that's 9 o'clock puck drops, right? Those are fun to cover too. No, I think you're absolutely right, Ryan. I think it's the easier conference, and everybody will say that as a knock against the Wild too, right? This is an easy conference. It's a cupcake conference they can get through. But like you had just mentioned, they're performing better against the better teams than they did against the California teams, who are the teams that they needed to get all those 2 points against. It's been interesting, and right now this is when their schedule gets tougher. They're now getting into the Vegases. They're now getting into Colorado. St. Louis they have yet to face. They'll face Arizona this weekend, which is probably another wash. And you don't forget, the top 4 move on, which everybody kind of gave a shoe into St. Louis, Colorado, and Vegas, and Minnesota kind of being on that bubble. You still got to go through those teams then to advance even further. You got to go against that top team, because I imagine the Wild will still probably finish right around 4, maybe 3 if they play well. But I think Minnesota has become a team, especially this year, that plays to the level of their opponent, which is so frustrating to see sometimes, which is great when you're playing against a high-speed Vegas team, awful when you're playing against an LA team that lets out rebounds and goals, and you kind of play to that level too. So it's to answer the question, I suppose, as I tiptoed around it, yes, it is very good. I think it's helpful, but it concerns me that maybe it's too soft of a league sometimes for them, because you don't want them to get into this habit of just playing these easy teams and taking the easy outs.
A couple more questions we'll get to. Jessi, one more that I wanted to get to. Talk about, from a reporter standpoint, covering hockey during a pandemic. You were on the Parisi Zoom today. You've been on more Zooms than probably you can even remember. But, we talked earlier today, you and I did, about a year ago. Next week, basically, they kicked reporters out of the locker room because the pandemic was coming. And every reporter, and I was like, how are they going to do their jobs?
Yeah.
A lot of being a reporter is being in the locker room, just building relationships. And to be honest, coming out of this, I'm not. If the NHL had its say, are reporters ever going to be in the locker room every day again? Talk about the challenges and how this has all gone for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's positives and negatives to it all, right? I mean, the positive of being able to do a Zoom from home is it makes some things easier. I've got kids at home, so it can be hard to figure out what to do with them and rush out to go to a news conference down at the X and have them in tow. So having that flexibility to do things at home is definitely very, very nice. However, like you had alluded to, Ryan, we lose those relationships in the locker room. And that's why the locker room is so important to have reporters in there. It's not necessarily to be present and be around these guys and all of that. It's to have those side conversations with players. Hey, how are you? And not just necessarily be a microphone. It's to put your face with yourself and with the byline, especially because nobody reads a byline. Nobody knows who this person is. So it's really important to identify yourself and to make yourself more than just a microphone. So guys do trust you, and you can build that trust and that relationship and start to find those really cool stories that everybody loves to read that go beyond the gamers, and you start to have kind of this friendship. So it's a bummer to have missed that, especially this year with the Minnesota Wild having so many new faces. They don't know us at all. Like next year, we're going to have a whole new introductory period and just say, hi, I'm Jessi with NHL.com and whatnot. And I also joke that it's easier for coaches or players to not answer my questions because they can't see my smiling face, asking them the hard hitting questions, which I've always used to my advantage too. So no, I mean, it's definitely unfortunate. I look forward to the time that we can return to be around everybody. That includes media people too. It's a missed thing. That's what makes our job so much fun to go to every day.
I know you miss being real close to Dan Myers and talking his ear off on game.
Always, yeah.
Amanda had a question about the trade deadline. Just wants to know what you think. Could there be a big deal in making kind of what the Wild has to offer?
I mean, there could. I think Bill Guerin has been very vocal about that from the get-go since he got here. Is everybody's tradable? I think he probably would not say that now because I'm sure there are guys like Kirill Kaprizov that is no longer tradable. But really, I think there are very few guys that he's going to say, hey, we can't move them. I think it's Kaprizov and Fiala for sure. And then any futures. I think everybody else, maybe he'd give a look. Naturally, everyone will talk about the number one center being a desperate need, but we kind of already addressed that with Joel Eriksson-Ek and Marco Rossi being potentials there. I really do like Dylan Strome, possibly from Chicago. So the trade deadline is April 12th. There's still a lot of time. I'm sure Bill is taking constant phone calls with every GM, but I think Dylan Strome could be a good help up the middle. He comes fairly cheap. He's 23 years old. I think he's got a hit of like $3 million. He's got 1 year left with Chicago. So I kind of like that idea. Also, I'm a big Bobby Ryan fan. Talked about my USA Hockey affinity, but he comes only at $1 million. He'd be a help on the wing. Again, I think Bill will make whatever move he truly thinks will make this team better. And so far, I think he's done a tremendous job at that. I think most of his moves have kind of panned out to be fairly successful for Minnesota and fairly fair too. I mean, I know there's obviously the pipeline in Pittsburgh that he's tapped on, but you look at the Greg Patter and Ian Cole, that certainly has worked out for Minnesota this year. So big splashes, I don't know. I think Bill will really only do those if they truly make sense for this team. And right now, looking around, I don't know that there's a guy that they could really lure and give away, but still get enough out of. So I'd be interested to see. I'd be surprised if he went through it completely quiet. I will say that.
Back to Parise for a minute. Speaking of the trade deadline, the Wild and Islanders had a trade allegedly back at the trade deadline last February that fell apart at the very last minute. But it's not as easy as trading a guy who makes that much money, still has a fair bit of term left on it, and also if he retires due to anything other than an injury, that cap hit just will literally cripple a team. So there's only a few contracts that you can get back, and in the Islanders deal, it would have been Andrew Ladd, but that combined with how things have gone this season, it's going to be a little bit different, a little bit harder for Bill Guerin if he wants to try to send Zach somewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, Zach still has to move that no trade too, right? That's also something that he was willing to do for the trade to the Islanders. And I get the sense that maybe Zach continues to be open with it. And I get the sense that Bill continues to have those conversations to move Zach. But again, he's not going to do it for pennies. And the 1-for-1 with Andrew Ladd, I think, probably wasn't quite fair necessarily, even from either side, frankly. And you do have to be concerned about that recapture if Zach retires, because he's 37 years old now. So, I mean, it's certainly, it's tough. You're wondering who could use a player like Zach, who needs a player like Zach, and then what are you getting in return? Again, I think Bill is always very forward thinking. And if he can get some really good prospects or some really big draft picks, we saw such a successful draft year out of Bill in the Minnesota Wild this season. He might consider that more. And again, it also looks at how much of that salary is he going to have to eat of Zach's in order to take that on. So I'm curious to see what happens, especially with the scratch and how everything transpired. I know everyone's making the jokes of, oh, he's out of here, he's going to request a trade. I don't think Zach's going to go to Bill and say, hey, get me out of here. But I think, the writing's been a little bit on the wall since last February when they got so close to making that move with New York there, that it's probably always a conversation that's being had.
And, we also don't know what's the cap going to look like. This is a few months last year, no fans. Who knows how long, potentially the whole season without full stands. And it's the cap is not going to go up. Let's put it that way. So really, even at the trade deadline, Russo did a great story the other day about Bill Garrett, his director of hockey ops, who travels with him just for, what is the cap situation today. But you're going to have to do a fair amount of predicting of the business of hockey in the coming year and maybe beyond to know, unless it's a rental just for this year, how are you going to be able to fit this guy in next year or the year after?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, every team has learned since that 2000 signing that 13 years isn't really feasible to keep a player around at a large cap hit. So it'll be interesting to see.
Those guys, because it was a kind of front loaded, they're not making as much now either, but the cap hit's still the same. So it seems like forever, the old CBA, it seems like forever ago when those deals were, I had to run into the office on my flip-flops. Yeah. Heather wants to know what our favorite social platform is and why is it TikTok? I assume that's meant for Heather and not me, because as I said in a call yesterday, I'm not your TikTok guy.
Dude, I love TikTok. Quarantine didn't suck you down the TikTok hole?
Somehow, no, like 7 jobs kept me busy. So
no, I love them all. I think they all complement each other. TikTok's my little secret that I just go on there and dance and be silly too. But I found a niche in doing some fun hockey videos and whatnot. It's the way I can let my silly self out. Not that I'm not silly on Twitter and Instagram and everywhere else. I'm certainly me across most boards, but Heather and I have some good TikTok back and forth. We're going to collab on a couple things, probably from the X at some point in here.
Awesome. Anybody else from the live audience have any questions? We'll wrap up here in a couple of minutes.
Cool, buddy. That's a good question.
The Wild's going to remember what happened in those last 10 minutes the other night for sure. It's hard to figure this team out, even when they're playing well. I used to feel like I had every night going in, you kind of knew what was going to happen. But ever since, they came home and played those games against LA, and that first game at home was just a trap. Like you figured, I even said they should start cacking in because 3-0 after one. Like this team, their starts have gotten much better. It's kind of a weird atmosphere in Vegas because there's some fans. It's distracting to watch. There's just flashing lights everywhere. You've got the gold helmets. Could be kind of anything tonight, but Talbot's back in that. I think that the Wild, they're going to have to be careful if they get that lead again to not let what happened the other night creep back in their brains.
Yeah, I mean, before this series, I predicted that it would be a split, so the Wild have to win in order to get my prediction correct. That would be much appreciated. No, I think they're just really going to have to piece together the full 60, which we've only seen a handful of times this season. Yeah. Usually in those game twos, though, I've been really impressed with their resilience to come out in those game twos very, very strong. So I think the Wild will pull it off in regulation too. I don't know that it'll necessarily go to overtime. I think it'll be an exciting game though. I thought Monday's game was so much fun to watch, just so back and forth, and to see the Minnesota Wild speed up and down the ice again has been such a welcome sight for sore eyes for so many years. So I think the Wild will pull it out. I hope Kyle Rao and Gerald Mayhew fit into this lineup and see how they do as well in the absence of Zach and Ryan Hartman. So I'm excited to watch. Go Wild.
Hey, I have 2 quick questions. One, which of you said they live by me? And
that's
2,
me, Amanda.
Amanda, okay. And then 2, I've read all about what Parisi did that got him in the doghouse, but can you kind of explain to me again what exactly he did that got him in the doghouse?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, this is all not hearsay. It's coming from Zach.
Maybe didn't get him in the doghouse, but can you explain the play that happened?
Yeah, so the play itself was right toward the end of regulation while Vegas had their goaltender pulled in order to try to tie the game up, which Alex Tuck eventually did do. So Zach had mentioned how his thought process was help Marcus Foligno go down and get the goal and get a hat trick for the game. And that was kind of his forefront of thought. Marcus ended up getting up on a rush coming out of the zone. It was something that maybe could have turned into something. It wasn't all that exciting, but ultimately at that point in the game, your goal is just to keep the puck out of your zone, right? And just to secure the win in regulation and get those 2 points and get out of there. And so Zach had eventually overextended his shift. So he's tired. He ended up being out there for, I believe, 1:33, which is a long time for anybody. It's especially long for again, 36-year-old. And so there ended up being a turnover. It wasn't necessarily Zach's fault in that moment, but he was on the ice. He was a part of that. He shouldn't have been out on the ice at that point in time. He should have gone in for a change for Jules Eriksson or somebody else to have come out. But ultimately that, I think, was what Dean Evason had told Zach was the reason that he was a healthy scratch for this evening. So Zach disagrees with the call. He had chatted with his teammates, and his teammates said that he made the right call in doing what he did. He just felt that changing at that time wasn't appropriate. Again, those are his words. So that's what we have been told.
Just what I
It's a long shift at any point in a hockey game.
Yeah.
Especially at that point. We talked about the overtime situation earlier and back with Boudreau. That's been the knock on the veterans for a while, is that they just extend their stay for a little bit too long in crucial situations, which is one of the reasons you're seeing, especially in overtime now, the young kids play.
Yeah.
I don't think he's getting beat up pretty hard. People on social media have not really taken his side either. They haven't been very happy with his response.
Right. I think a lot of that is, Zach was trying to defend himself and trying to make it clear that the intent was good. Like he was trying to help out a teammate. But as we all know, it's kind of one of those times where maybe a swallowing of the pride would have served a little bit better of use, just saying, hey, I made a mistake, messed up. I'm going to take my lashing and sit this one out and look forward to getting back with the team. So I think that rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way. The fact that he was so defensive a little bit and not necessarily saying, hey, yep, let's move forward with this. But again, it is what it is at this point. I'm sure Zach will come out of it just as strong against Arizona, and his teammates will have his back as much there as they do tonight.
Who do you think?
I don't think, this is not going to be an ongoing thing, or I think that probably both Evason and Parisi after tonight's game will be ready to not be asked about it, Jessi, for the next.
Yes.
Maybe Zach comes out and scores 2 goals the next game against Arizona. They'll ask him about it, but outside of that, this is down the river. They don't ever want to talk about this again.
Exactly. And Zach's comments come on the heels of it just happening. So I'm sure there's frustration, right? It's an embarrassing thing for any player. It's not fun for any guy to say, hey, you're not playing tonight because you're not performing well enough. And, a guy like Zach, again, will take that to heart, and he doesn't want to be known as this guy that can't play the game to the best of his ability. So I'm sure those comments were also made just as much out of frustration and embarrassment as anybody would feel. So I'm, willing to give him a little bit of a pass on that there as well.
That moment of being around the locker room when somebody finds out they're not playing, who's normally in the lineup, is probably the most awkward situation for anybody who's in that locker room. And I wound up one year in the coach's office. It doesn't matter what coach it was, but with a reporter in the coach's office at about 6:45 with a 7 o'clock puck drop, getting the coach's response to a player who'd said some things about how he found out when he found out. So it's a hard thing. Especially, it's a little bit different. Guys were wearing masks around there. It's not as easy to communicate and get around the areas that you can't necessarily go where you used to be able to. So just a tough spot for, quite honestly, Evason and Zach as well. You feel Zach's a proud player. He has busted his butt. When you're not putting the puck in the net, you're struggling trying to do some other things. He wants, trust me, nobody hates losing outside of this guy, maybe more than Zach Parisi. So he just wants the team to win, and he wants his teammates to be successful too. He looks like he's playing with a guy who's never had a hat trick, got 2 goals. Hey, let's go get Moose a hat trick. So.
Exactly. I thought you were going to say the coach told you were healthy scratch for the night and you could sit out on the media requests for an evening, maybe.
Sorry, I have another question now that you brought it up. So I feel like you guys know better than I would, but I feel like Evason was hired. It was a goofy year of the pandemic. They let Boudreau go. I felt like he was hired more interimly than he, you know what I mean? Let's get him in to be our interim. Do you think he's got that position locked in, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I'll be the first to admit I was probably in the boat that was a little apprehensive about taking the interim tag off of him. You know, I didn't really know a whole lot. Wasn't sure if he was quite ready to be this NHL caliber coach. I mean, he got the team through the bubble and he certainly earned it. He did great stepping up in Bruce's absence after they let him go last February. But now he's in talks about the Jack Adams for coach of the year, you know, and I don't think that that's that crazy either, because he certainly has found a way to communicate with this team, which is, you know, one of the biggest challenges, I think, for any coach, but especially a new coach who hasn't been proven necessarily at the NHL level, especially when you've got all these new faces that you're trying to gel together in a time that you can't gel everyone together like you normally would, right? These guys can't get together off the ice. They're only seeing each other at practices and games. So a large credit to Dean Evason for being able to bring this group together and to find the success and to be willing to try the things that he has. I mean, you talk about the power play struggling. Well, let's roll just the lines and not have power play units, or, you know, let's sit the vets for a little bit on those 3-on-3s and let the young guys take it. I mean, he's done so much to change a lot of the on-ice stuff, in addition to, I think, really taking on the culture and the locker room and being more communicative with his players and with the team as a whole and working together as an organization. I think he's done a tremendous job with this team. And I think that's why you're starting to see the success and starting to see him as a bona fide NHL coach.
And let's not forget, that was pretty much Paul Fenton's hire too. You know,
Yeah.
when Paul brought him in from the national organization, you know, everybody kind of looked and said, well, is this the coach in waiting for, you know, in case Bruce slides? Because of course Bruce was other guys. This organization's never quite had the coaches and GMs sync up in contracts, so you're always kind of inheriting somebody else's. So, you know, Fenton brought in Evason, and we all kind of said, all right, well, what's going to happen here? Fenton's long gone, you know, and you assume they're going to bring somebody else in, but Evason made such a good impression on everybody around him. They're like, all right, let's give this guy a shot, because I think you can tell on the bench even he is such a good communicator, especially with the younger players. And I think the older players respect him as well. You know, he had a long, successful career in the NHL, even if he wasn't a superstar. He communicates so well. And, you know, it's 2021. It's not 1980s hockey. It's not even hockey from back when I worked in the league. It is a whole nother level, and you've got to be able to communicate first and foremost above even X's and O's.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone knows it, everyone talks about it, but I literally. But I think Dean truly, and I know Bill Guerin had mentioned that when they decided to hire him full time, is how impressed they were through all of this COVID, through the pause, through the bubble, through everything, how in touch Dean remained with his players and with his team and with management as well. So I think that is a huge asset that Dean brought to the team, and the players have seemed to be responsive and receptive to it as well.
All right, I think we'll probably wrap up here. Jordy, do you have anything else you want to say to everybody about Bleachr App? Anything else you got coming up?
Yay.
Let's go. Yay.
The takeout. You can read all about it tomorrow if you can't stay up.
I love it.
Good day, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys. Have a good night.